I have been here in this location for almost 10 years, and I moved from Waverly back down to Bedford where I grew up. I've always been a bit of a gardener. I started with vegetables. I moved on to perennials, and now I'm sort of leaning towards native plants and alpines and woodland plants. So the alpine plants could be considered sort of worldwide, or at least northern hemisphere. But I have been adding a fair number of native plants to my collection. So this one is Actea pachypoda, is a baneberry. So I've got this a couple of years, probably from the Acadia plant sales when they do the wild plant sales.
Yeah.
So it's just coming on now. It's probably will be starting its third year this year. So I am getting fruit. And you kept me down to 20 pictures, so I can't show more. This one is the what is it? Apios tuber. What is it?
Ground.
Yeah, the ground nut. I got this from Hillendale. So this has actually only been in the ground for about 3 years now, and is starting to really flower. And I found out that it is a very enthusiastic grower. I'm seeing quite a few, pieces come up at some distance from the original plant. It's fine where it is on my part. I may have to hack it out of my neighbor's yard because I've got it growing on a chain link fence along the edge of my property. So we'll see how that goes, but it's really quite attractive and native and edible. So that was an addition a few years ago. So this is not my yard. We talk about, invasive plants versus enthusiastic native plants. So this is a native plant in Nova Scotia, this marsh marigold, but if it's got the right conditions, it can pretty much be an enthusiastic grower. Some of you may know of this garden in Kingswood. It's a garden that slopes down to this catchment area where all the water that comes down the hill sort of settles here, and then it gradually sort of works its way through that natural berm and then goes down to the lake. It's really quite a wonderful show. And I think this started from just a few plants that were up on the hill a little farther, and now it is seeding around generously. So whether it could be considered native to this part of Nova Scotia is the question, but it certainly is very happy in Kingswood. So this is blue cohosh. I've never grown this plant. I've never seen it before, but I got seed from a seed house in Ontario. So there's my seedlings. So we will see how that goes. I'm quite interested to introduce it to my property. I'm quite a compulsive seed starter. So this plant came when I started to develop a boggy area, a peat bog, and all that was spread around, after the bog was built was just dry sphagnum. And last year I pretty much noticed there's a nice little leaf there. I wonder what it is, and when it flowered, I found out what it is. It's the gold leaf or gold thread, Coptis trifolia, three-leaf gold leaf. So I'm quite happy that decided to settle in. There's some other things in there that have kind of come either with the sphagnum that was sort of put on the top, or some things that I've brought in from elsewhere. Something else that I brought in there were some of the vacciniums, the little cranberries. I'm not sure whether it's a small leaf one. I think it must be. That's creeping around quite happily. And nice big patches of the bluets that were brought in from an area that was stripped to make a meadow. And I thought I'm going to get some of that, those bluets. And along came a few of the other things in the sod. So I'm quite happy about that. So this is my patch of yellow lady slippers. Obviously, these are most often found up in the areas around Windsor where there's a lot of gypsum in the ground. I found it to be a very happy grower in my garden. I started with 2 plants must be 20 years ago now. And this is one clump. 10 years ago, I moved it in the middle of June in the pouring rain in full flower, and it never objected a bit. So for me, it seems to be quite an easy growing orchid compared to our native pink variety, which is a lot more fussy. I do have the pink one that I brought from my property, and it's there, but the deer seem to eat it every year. So I'm going to have to put it in a cage. And then the showy, I got this from a Rhododendron Society member-to-member sale some years ago. Nowhere near as enthusiastic a grower, but it does survive. I think, maybe it's a little dry where I've got it, but it has survived now for, well, I've had it probably for 15 years. I'm a big fan of the orchids. You tell me an orchid and I'm there. Now, this came from another gardener's garden. It's the nice little what do you call it, maidenhair, Adiatum pendatum. I always think that this is a plant that requires a sweeter soil, but it seems to be perfectly fine in my garden, and I'm quite happy to have it. It's so dainty and so lovely to see that coming in with its quite different texture to a lot of other things around. You see, there's all kinds of leaf textures around it, but it's a native plant, and I'm quite happy to have it. It came from a garden that no longer exists, so I'm happy I got it out of that garden before that garden was totally stripped and had a big old new house built on it. And I brought this fern with me from my old garden. It's the rock cap fern. I'll write down the names here. So that's Polypodium virginianum. It's slow, but it's sitting there on a rock with a bit of moss down by the brook. So I think it'll be, in time, it'll gradually get some size on it. This fern is actually one that was in the woods on the property next door to me, just up the brook a little bit. And I actually have another one in the garden. So this is the Christmas fern. Really, a nice thing to have in the winter time when a lot of the ferns are dormant and deciduous. So I'm happy to have that one. Now this was on the property. This happens to be a really particularly nice clump. It's when I bought the property, there were 4 large trees in the driveway, and I needed to take down some trees so that I could actually do work on the house and put an addition on. This is the remaining tree. It's a big old oak tree, and you might say that this plant is kind of between a rock and a hard place because it's got gravel driveway all around and the tree trunk on the other, but it puts on a really nice show. I don't call it wild lily of the valley anymore. I don't even call it Mayflower. I call it by its Latin name, which is Maianthemum canadensis, because if you start saying it's Mayflower, I said there's something else I call Mayflower, and lily of the valley, wild lily of the valley, false lily of the valley. Maybe I'm not going to go there. And I hear somebody's talking about bloodroot, about on the Meander River. I've certainly seen the bloodroot there when I've been into Smiley's to see the lady slippers. But it does really quite well for me. It makes a lot of seed, which I have to kind of collect before the ants take it away. It's perhaps not in as moist an area as it would like to be, but if we get good moisture in the summertime, it stays in leaf well into the summer. I also have the double form and a slightly pink form. The question is, are they hybrids or are they natural variations on the single bloodroot? I like to think that they're natural variations. And when it's in leaf, it's really nice too. I love the way it comes up with the leaves kind of folded around the buds. It's a great plant. And just finishing up with, in my garden, this is a vaccinium. I think this is probably a European cultivar of our North, Borealis Vaccinium vitis idea. It's really doing really super well for me. It creeps along and just sort of making a really nice ground cover, sort of in semi-shaded areas. and it does make some nice flowers and some nice fruit. But this one is the true North, the Canadian or Eastern Canada version of the very small Vaccinium vitis idea. I had that in my own garden, and I'd really like to have that as well. It's not anywhere near as vigorous in my garden. I think perhaps I don't have enough sun, but I'd like to get that one back again. So this summer, because I'm preparing for this conference of the North American Rock Garden Society, which we're doing in June, I thought I need to go and see what's in flower in Polly's Cove in June. So I went down, and I went down just down to the right of the path. There's a little kind of, sort of rock ledges that take you down to the boggy area. And I caught sight of this, and I was so excited because I'm never down there in June. I'm usually down there in the fall when everything's in fall color. So I was very excited to see this. So I had to get down and take my little picture of my single little plant. And then I stood up to look around a little farther, and I found that the whole bog was full of it. Now, mind you, the wind was blowing so hard, most of my pictures are quite foggy. I should have actually put it on video. I would have had a better picture. But you can see there's lots of it there, and I was very excited. And when I went down this fall, I couldn't see any indication of where it might have been. I didn't recognize the leaves because it really kind of, it's really only showing when it's in flower. And then I went out to Briar Island as part of my my plans for this post-conference tour, which will be taking people down to Briar Island. So I was looking in Todd Boland's book, and he says this is not native, and I don't know whether it's not native or whether it's a long time introduced or whether it actually is native. It certainly is native to northern parts of Canada. So I consider this, I'm going to consider this native. So when I was there in July, it really wasn't, it pretty much finished flowering. But it's so nice to see that growing right along, basically between the high tide mark and the shore, the dry land. So it's really quite an interesting plant to see. Oyster leaf, I think, is the common name. And then finishing up on Briar Island, I was there in July. So this was down in the south end of the island. I'm having trouble with my names here. Oh, well, it's a fringed orchid, Plantaphora, I think. I'm not sure whether this is the lesser one or the larger one. I think it's lesser. Again, in July, and when I was down there this July, of course, it's a little upsetting to see that people are just kind of driving over them with the four-wheel, dune buggies, basically, the ATVs. There's some for some there's no appreciation for what they're driving over. So there were big messy ruts, and I have noticed lately that they talked about one of the tides and the winds cut through that beach into the pond in behind. So there's been quite a change in that recently. So I think that's all I've got. Any questions? I could say that there are lots of other things on my property that were already here, like the Mayflower, the Gaultheria, the Cornus, all kinds of things that were already here that I'm quite happy to have and will treasure. But I will probably be adding more, as I am a plant collector and love to add, especially native plants to the yard, because maybe 1/3 of the property is cultivated and the other 2/3 is basically woods. So I think it's appropriate to bring in those native plants. So,
Roslyn, excuse me, do you have any photos, long shots of your garden so that we could get an idea of how these are spread over your property?
let me see. Do you want me to go hunting for them? How about I'll look, and maybe if I can find some and bring them up at the end.
Sure, if that's okay with Bob.
If there's time.
Yeah. You want it, so we'll come back to you a little later. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I'll go through my files and see if I can find a few pictures of the garden overall.
Sure. Okay.
Roslyn,
Yeah,
John Monder for Newfoundland. You mentioned that Todd Boland had said Mertensia is not native to Nova Scotia.
that's what
I don't know if it is for sure, but I'll tell you, it's as common as you can have it on sort of the upper beaches in Newfoundland. It's just everywhere on sort of gravelly, sandy beaches.
Well, when I look at the information, it says that, Newfoundland and more northern parts of Eastern Canada, it's certainly very common. But him not saying it wasn't native, maybe originally to Nova Scotia, but it certainly has made its presence known now along the coastlines.
Yeah, that's true. Now, just one quick comment. I think you said your showy lady slippers weren't necessarily growing as well as, say, the yellow ones. But there's an interesting undergraduate thesis that was done at the Grenfell College, Memorial University in Cornbrook, in Newfoundland, and it turns out that the showy lady slippers really gravitate towards black ash trees, and she found that they had an underground mycorrhizal fungus association between them, and presumably that's why the showy lady slippers grow so well, and they gravitate towards the ash tree. So if you got a black ash tree, maybe plant some nearby, or even a little small one, because it may be the association that really helps them.
Well, I think about how they're growing at Smiley's, and you think that they're kind of, and also in Ontario, I've seen them growing in that sphagnum, sitting on top of that constantly moving flow of water underneath.
Yeah.
And I know I don't have the moisture, especially in the summertime, it can get quite dry there. But unfortunately, I'm pretty sure there's not an ash tree on the property. So I'll have to start looking for a black ash.
Yeah, just even a little one, because they seem to have this fungal association through the soil, and it really seems to work in Western Newfoundland. Anyway, I'll leave it at that, but yeah, just a thought.
I understand too that if a moose walks by and does a dropping in the middle of them, they do really well too.
Well, that's true.